Now I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, the chair and president of the Foundation for the National Archives, A'Lelia Bundles. After a 30-year career as a network television news producer and as executive with ABC News and NBC News, A'Lelia Bundles now is president of the Madam Walker A'Lelia Walker Family Archives, the largest private collection of Walker photographs, business records, letters, clothing, furniture, and personal artifacts. On her ground, the life and times of Madam C.J. Walker, her best-selling biography of her great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother, was named a New York Times notable book. She's currently at work on her third book, Joy, Goddess of Harlem, The Life and Times of A'Lelia Walker, a biography of her great-grandmother. In addition to her work with the Foundation for the National Archives, Bundles serves as a Columbia University trustee, and she's on the board of the Madam Walker Theater Center of Indianapolis and on the Radcliffe Institute's Schlesinger Library Council at Harvard. Please join me in welcoming A'Lelia Bundles.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everybody. And welcome to the best 4th of July parade seat in America. Today we wave our flags, and I see some of you are waving your fans as well. We stuff ourselves with hot dogs and barbecue. We light sparklers, and we get nostalgic for homemade ice cream and cherry popsicles. We wait with great anticipation for a night sky filled with fireworks. Today, we celebrate the Declaration of Independence, the document that was approved 236 years ago by the men we have come to call America's founding fathers. 56 men who sat in a hot, stuffy room in Philadelphia during the summer of 1776, plotting their treasonous revolt against King George III. But today, I'd like to ask you to remember and celebrate those Americans who were not inside Assembly Hall. Women, African Americans, Native Americans, indentured servants, small family farmers, and the generations of immigrants who arrived on our shores after the Revolution. Beyond those doors at Independence Hall, in small towns, in kitchens, and on farms, were our founding mothers and our founding citizens. They too had a stake in the outcome of the Revolutionary War. And though Hollywood and the history books of my childhood rendered them mostly invisible, they were not absent. In 1776, barely 2.5 million people, including about 500,000 enslaved people of African descent and several thousand free people of color, lived in America's 13 newly created states. Throughout the rest of the continent, there were hundreds of thousands of Native Americans, Cherokee, Iroquois, Choctaw, Shawnee, and more. While Thomas Jefferson was drafting the Declaration and the Continental Congress was debating matters large and small, Black soldiers were helping stave off King George's redcoats. In fact, 6 years earlier at the 1780 Boston Massacre, Crispus Attucks, a sailor and escaped slave, had become the first casualty of the Revolution, gunned down by the king's troops in a public square. During the spring of 1775, several slaves and free Black men fought in the military skirmishes at Lexington and Concord. While Paul Revere was shouting, "The British are coming," Peter Salem was loading his musket for battle. 2 months later at Bunker Hill, that same Peter Salem killed the officer who had commanded the British forces at Lexington and Concord. By the end of the war, some 5,000 African Americans had served in the Continental Army, from Saratoga and Trenton to the final victory at Yorktown. One of those free men of color was my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, Ishmael Roberts, who traveled with Colonel Abraham Shepard's apparently rather motley crew in the 10th North Carolina Regiment to Valley Forge. While the founding fathers insisted on freedom and liberty for themselves, there was no critical mass willing to argue for the freedom and liberty for human beings whose uncompensated labor allowed their fledgling nation to prosper. While Patrick Henry could proclaim, "Give me liberty or give me death," on his own behalf, he also owned other human beings because he said of the general inconvenience of living without them. In 1776, as the words of liberation were read in public, overheard in carriages, and debated in drawing rooms, the servants, drivers, and valets soaked in every phrase and spread the news. The messages may not have traveled as quickly as a Facebook post or a retweet on Twitter, but the information made its way from dining room to veranda, from plantation to city. As the Patriots listed their grievances against King George, the enslaved men and women couldn't help but wonder why the words that all men are created equal should not include them. And so they embraced the spirit of the revolution and applied it to their own condition of servitude. In February 1774, a full year and a half before the Second Continental Congress, Phyllis Wheatley, the Black poet, wrote, "In every human breast, God has implanted a principle which we call love of freedom. It is impatient of oppression and pants for deliverance. I will assert that same principle lives in us." But her plea went unanswered by the generation of the Founding Fathers. After the peace treaty between the United States of America and Britain was signed in 1783, slavery remained the law of the land. Although Benjamin Franklin later served as president of the Pennsylvania Society for Promoting the Abolition of Slavery, George Washington continued to own slaves, as did Thomas Jefferson and 10 other presidents. John Adams, though, was the exception, with no slaves in his household. His wife, Abigail Adams, was even more anti-slavery than he. In September 1774, she wrote, "It always appeared a most iniquitous scheme to me to fight for ourselves what we daily are robbing and plundering from those who have as good a right to freedom as we have." Mrs. Adams is, however, perhaps even more well known for her stance on women's rights, a topic the Founding Fathers seem to have found as unworthy as the rights of bondsmen. "I long to hear that you have declared an independency," Abigail wrote to John in March of 1776. "And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could." John Adams' reply a few weeks later was entirely unsatisfactory. After calling Abigail saucy for her sentiments, he wrote, "As to your extraordinary code of laws, I cannot but laugh." 76 years later, women still could not vote, and slavery had expanded into new states and territories. Frederick Douglass, a former slave, an abolitionist, and one of America's greatest orators, could stand the hypocrisy no more. He admired, he said, the eloquent words of the Declaration, but when invited to present a 4th of July address in Rochester, New York, he felt duty-bound to speak frankly. "Fellow citizens," he said on July 5th, 1862, "the signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, And for the good they did and the principles they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory. Fellow citizens, please pardon me. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The 4th of July is yours, not mine. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than any of the other days of the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Allow me to say, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the State of the Union, I do not despair of this country. My spirit is cheered with the obvious tendencies of the age. Douglas's words were meant to make his audience squirm in much the same way the Founding Fathers intended to put King George III on notice. Just as the Patriots wanted the British Parliament to recognize their political and property rights, Frederick Douglass implored his audience to confront the inconsistencies in their words and deeds. But he did not abandon America. Instead, he continued to challenge the status quo with his anti-slavery newspaper, the North Star. After the Civil War, he served as the U.S. Minister and Consul General to Haiti and President of the Freedmen's Bank. He advised President Abraham Lincoln and lived the rest of his life forcing America to confront its imperfections. And so, when I ponder Frederick Douglass's question, what is the 4th of July? I can't help but imagine what he hoped the answer might become. Did he envision a day when his descendants might claim the day as their own? Today, because of Douglass and the generations of righteous and courageous men and women who came after the Founding Fathers, I choose to claim the 4th of July as my own.
Huzzah!
It is as much mine as it is yours. It is mine, it is yours, it is ours. It belongs to me as much as it belongs to the Founding Fathers, because I know my ancestors on farms, in factories, and on battlefields helped build America and make it what it is today. In 1776, we were a loose confederation of 2.5 million people clustered in 13 newly created states. Today, we are a nation of 312 million in 50 states, a land of immigrants who have come from every continent. And today, we all can claim a place in this American family. We all can look to the documents that are just inside these gigantic doors at the National Archives, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, the documents we call the Charters of Freedom. We can also look to the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the 19th Amendment, and all the other laws and statutes and executive orders that have helped clarify the unfinished business of the Founding Fathers. We can use the Charters of Freedom as a framework for debate, to settle conflicts and promote civility, to seek common ground and common cause, to work together to turn our ever-evolving, ever-imperfect nation into a more perfect union. Thank you.